On the show today, we are discussing growth and development, fighting poverty and inequality in West Africa. Joining me in the studio to discuss this, I have His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Barfuor Adjei-Barwuah, Ghana Ambassador to the United States of America. And also I have Mr. Tijani Hamza from Oxfam International based in Accra, Ghana. I have also joining me Mr. Alex Wofa. Ambassador,
Yes.
what's your take on that?
So to a certain extent, even in terms of combating this pandemic, Ghana should be taken as an exemplar because the sort of measures that we've taken, obviously, for our kind of country and for the success that we have registered, we probably have a thing or two, to teach other countries.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for the insight. Mr. Hamza, you are on the ground in Accra right now, in Ghana. Can you give me your assessment of current situation in terms of the continuing the pandemic vis-a-vis the announcement from President Nana?
Actually, thanks again. It's been quite interesting, and I want to side with the ambassador by also amplifying the fact that I think that as a country and leadership in Ghana, we have done very, very well in trying to contain the virus in Ghana. And this has been done through several things. For me, critical one is risk communication, and then putting a sense of agency on the issue, and the regular interaction by the people, from speeches from ministers of state and then the presidency. But to the specifics of the issues, I think that supporting with water, sanitation, hygiene, risk communication, PPE support, radio programs, assuring the populace about the need to take the pandemic seriously has gone around the whole country that generally can feel a level of satisfaction. People actually feel that we are even too cautious, and sometimes I feel that it is better to err on the side of caution than to take things for granted.
Thank you so much for that insight. Before I go to Mr. Alex, I would like to take this with His Excellency Ambassador Barfuor. Ambassador, a few weeks ago, the president handed over the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Secretariat in Accra, to the AU leadership. And looking at the opening of the border, in which the president also visited Kotoka International Airport, do you see this helping the economy to open up for better opportunity for investors in Ghana?
Well, the fact of the matter is, when it comes to the development of economies these days, we are also linked. Right. That somehow or the other, somebody has to come, somebody has to go to make international exchange possible. And indeed, with the opening of the headquarters of the free trade area, it basically symbolizes the fact that the whole of the continent actually is open for business. And we in Ghana are fortunate, as it were, to have the head office, which obviously will have to serve both as beside the headquarters, but we are also going to be the fulcrum for African and international trade. The fact of the matter is, maybe geographically, we are also very well situated. But then also, it is good to note that for all that Ghana's involvement with the AU has been over the years, it was about time that we also assumed responsibility for a certain part of the AU's business.
Right.
So it is good that the headquarters has been opened. And I also do believe that it is going to seriously improve on intercontinental, trade, as well as intracontinental trade. Because the tragedy of our situation on the continent has been that connectivity has been so bad. And then, of course, our international trade has always been compartmentalized on the basis of the colonial experience that we had. So now we have an opportunity to trade amongst ourselves, because we do need to have that kind of relationship, to justify the fact that we Africans are the only people who have no objection to be called an African, irrespective of where we come from. In some of the other areas, you have to mention their countries first before you mention which continent they come from.
Right.
But we have that commonality of interest. So now we have an opportunity to redesign the lines of our trade. We have an opportunity to redesign the measures that we have to take to behave like a big market. Because I do believe that for the population that we have,
right,
and Africa is going to have probably the youngest and the most avaricious population that the world will have. We have a population that is good and ready to consume anything and everything. What we have to back up with is the fact that we also ought to take a significant part of the production of the items that we are going to exchange. Because if we didn't, then the effort probably might be wasted. And whilst we do that, I believe that we ought to be careful enough not to, as it were, just copy everything that has happened elsewhere.
Right.
Because quite unfortunately, over the decades, people have managed to take fair exchange of goods and services to a different level. Most of the nations have forgotten that there is something called negotiation. All that they do is to replace, negotiation with a lot of maneuvering and wordsmiths and whatnot. So that in the end, you end up that, in fact, there hasn't been any fair, exchange of goods and services. So we have to be aware of that and protect that, because that is what we are going to need.
Thank you so much for that unique insights, Ambassador. I will come back to you in a minute, to get more of that, thoughts. Let me quickly go to Alex, because, Alexandra leads Global Fund for Children, and Ambassador just mentioned about the significance that the youth will have on, Africa development and growth. Can you tell me more, Alex, about what you do at the Global Fund for Children?
Right. Thanks again. And again, to your audience, just permit me to apologize for my casual demeanor, because I'm very much on vacation at this time. But yeah, so Global Fund for Children is an organization based in the US in Washington, DC, that supports the capacity development of community-based organizations around the world. And with capacity development, we're talking about the plethora of options, from the traditional micro sort of formal capacity development interventions like finance management, to monitoring and evaluation, to IT systems, to more nuanced and more intangible capacity development interventions like leadership, like resilience, like strategic thinking, like stakeholder connections. And that's essentially what we do. We also provide flexible funding to these community-based organizations. And the goal is to support them in whatever it is that they exist to do and to help them fulfill their missions in the best possible way. And that manifests in different ways, depending on the context, depending on the organization. My role is overseeing the Africa operations, and I lead the Africa team to support our partners in their work.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for that. Mr. Tijani Ahmed, let me come to you real quick. How can corruption that has been a bane of growth and development be effectively tackled in West Africa?
That's an interesting question. I mean, as we all know, I mean, corruption is one of the biggest impediments to progress in Africa. There is both what I call a domestic and international dimension to the question of corruption. I understand from Transparency International that over $50 billion are lost to corruption on an annual basis. Reduction in corruption will contribute to improving quality of life in Africa, which is, we think, is endowed with a lot of natural resources. There have been several institutional reforms over the last decades in Africa to deal with issues around corruption, but unfortunately, the impact has been very, very, what I'll say, minimal. To answer your question, I think there are 4 things that I think will be critical to minimizing corruption in Ghana, and these examples are also part of what I have seen happening in some countries in Africa. One is the whole issue around digitization. You know, digitizing our processes is creating new ways to fight corruption by, for example, providing governments with new platforms to engage citizens and businesses with a lot of transparency. And I'll just give an example. In Ghana now, I mean, some years ago, if you imported a car from America or anywhere in the world, you got to the port, and then somebody gave you the cost of, what's the name, the price you pay. And you didn't even know how the person came by the prices. So you have to negotiate, and that's where the corruption came. By now, there's actually an app where you can put the year of the vehicle, the age of the vehicle, the capability of the vehicle, which gives you, in general sense, the value that you go and pay. So once you go to the hub, you have an expectation of how much you pay. If it is higher than that, you have the opportunity to challenge it. So digitization, for me, is key. But also enactment of freedom of information laws. I think that lack of information becomes an impediment to you to do what we call value for money auditing. So if there is transparency, there's a whole lot of information around dealings by government, dealings by private sector. It provides the citizen with information as basis for them to interrogate the issue. But I think that governments over the years have also created what we call anti-corruption agencies. But unfortunately, in most countries in Africa, funding of these anti-corruption agencies leaves very little to be desired. And that means that they are more or less bounded. They cannot act. They are like two-fledged bulldogs. And sometimes people wonder whether there is really political will from the establishment to deal with corruption. Related to that is a whole issue around what kind of punishment and regimes are there to deal with miscreants. I mean, the legal regimes sometimes are so slow. The legal regimes are very, very bureaucratic. So there are challenges around how to administer or to deal with miscreants in the country. So I just feel if we continue to digitize, if you have freedom of information, government creating and enforcing laws that addresses how to deal with process of corruption, and funding of anti-corruption agencies can play a significant role in dealing with corruption in Africa.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed Tijani. Let me go back to our ambassador. Ambassador, some critics say World Bank and other foreign DFIs are out to impoverish Africans with conditions attached to the loans they offer. What's your take on this?
Well, I suppose most of us, even where we don't have significant access to information, the little that we get obviously suggests that most of the time, the terms of our engagement with a lot of these organizations that are supposedly helping us with funding, the terms tend to be excruciating. And the fact is, one way or the other, we end up owing a lot of money. One, partly because the initial terms were bad enough, partly because we cannot, run away from this. Sometimes our negotiators don't actually cut the mustard, the way it should be cut. And then, of course, I don't understand why any of these organizations, advancing some kind of credit to us, start from a certain position that it is possible that whatever we are going to use the money for is going to fail. And therefore, they have to build into it certain kinds of protections just in case we don't, make good on our responsibilities. Because if your attitude is that the possibility is high that we are going to fail, then probably you ought to take a decision that, sorry, but I'm not going to be able to advance credit to an entity or a country or something that we do believe is not going to make it. But they will still give the money under rather very, very, stringent terms. And the minute you recognize that it is not going to be possible to deliver on those, then somehow or the other, everybody starts closing in. Such and such is not creditworthy, this and this and this. Then they impose sanctions and whatnot. The unfortunate bit is that we have always been on the receiving end, because when it suits, certain countries, the terms that they give to themselves vis-a-vis us are such that they basically, take whatever we have for virtually nothing. So I think the terms of both the terms of trade, the terms of credit and whatnot, have just been too much on us. And I do believe that this is the time when people ought to negotiate with us in good faith. But then it is also time for we on the continent also to brace ourselves and actually go in for those kinds of credits that are obviously going to deliver on what we want to do, so that we can return other people's monies and maybe take more, or whatever it is that we are doing, we ought to be able to do it to the extent where even we can support a greater proportion of it. And then sometimes our difficulty is that we borrow money for projects, and the way even the projects are couched and whoever is behind the project is such that the money that we are borrowing probably never even enters our countries, and yet we start paying for them even when sometimes the projects have not been completed. You see, I have a feeling that this is the time that either using the free trade arrangement, or using whatever it is that we have in the African Union at the moment, we as a group ought to be able to set some bars as to what is it that we can take or what is it that we shouldn't take. And when you look at the examples of what have been happening on the continent, people give loans to countries, and most probably they knew right from the beginning that it was going to be very difficult for the countries to make good on the repayment of the loans. And what do? Because maybe they have a bigger firepower and all that, they come and tell you that under the circumstances, we have even seized the project. Some country comes to your country and then they seize a project in your country because they believe that you haven't made good on payment terms and so on. So I think maybe with us, besides the idea of making sure that we get together properly and do good business amongst ourselves, we also ought to help ourselves in negotiating that we get some of these credits that we take. Because, of course, those people who give us the credit are in for the money. They are in for the profit. I don't think we expect them to be altruistic enough not to be looking for anything else. But the whole idea of slicing off, the best part or the carcass in the name of, profits or in the name of the terms and whatnot, we ought to be able to, amongst ourselves, try to tighten up. It is very, necessary that we do so.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. On that, I want everyone to respond to this. Is China a true development partner, both in West Africa and on the continent? Alex.
Well,
that's a loaded. Adjei, please go ahead.
Alex can go ahead. Alex, go ahead.
That's a loaded question. And for me, it depends really on I'll give you the consultant's answer that it depends. And it depends on your perspective. What I've always appreciated about China is they get straight to the point, right? In my limited dealings with transactions around that have involved Chinese entities, they get straight to the point and cut a lot of the red tape that is usually associated with working with other entities from like the US, the UK, etc. This does support in many ways some of the things that His Excellency mentioned, which is more favorable terms, trying to understand the context in which some of these transactions are happening. But then on the other side, you do have examples like Zambia, where because of their deep history with China in terms of financing transactions, you have several of their state and quasi-state institutions now under Chinese control. From their newspaper to their port, I understand they are even now teaching Mandarin in their schools, which is pretty interesting given, but indicative of the fact that they have a huge Chinese national presence in their country. So for me, it's a bit difficult to categorically state yes or no, given my deep involvement in some of these transactions. But from a 30,000 view of things, I would approach this with a bit of caution because I've seen the adverse effects, and I would not like Ghana, where I'm from, to be in such a situation, for instance, although I see a lot of benefits in entering in such transactions with Chinese entities.
Mr. Tijani, what's your take?
It's quite an interesting, what's the name? It's quite an interesting dimension, actually, to this discussion. Are they a true development partner? Look, I will start by saying that, yes, they are very direct. I mean, they cut down the bureaucracy. They want this, they want you to give them this. There is slow, weak skills transfer on Chinese projects. We were all in Ghana when they came to build stadia, and then they just brought their people. So little skills transfer. There is another angle of the Chinese relationship with Africa that sometimes when I just reflect back on the previous question on conditionalities, that I feel that is where Chinese partnership with Africa is weak. In general terms, I do feel that there are some of the conditions of the World Bank and the IMF related to Africa. Sometimes I feel they are good for us, and I can give reasons why I think so. And so I feel that the Chinese relationship with Africa lacks conditionalities, the positive part of conditionality. So for example, they will not, for example, insist on anything that has to do with rights, that has to do with transparency. And you know, some states in Africa like opaqueness, you understand me? And for that matter, I have challenges with the Chinese facility because you can never find the sort of relationship that a blueprint that they have. Last week, I was having discussions to plan a strategy process for Oxfam in Ghana. And I was telling somebody, should we invite the Chinese embassy? They said no. I said, yes, let's try and invite them. They should have an agenda for what they want to do in Ghana. Let's listen. You understand me? Let's listen to them. So my challenge with the Chinese investment is that irrespective of freedom of information or transparency processes that we have, which could have emanated based on our relationship with the West, the Chinese sometimes, I will say diplomatically, they make nonsense out of these broader things. So it's quite opaque, if you ask me, their relationship. So I'll be cautious also to understand better their modus operandi if I don't get close.
Okay, thank you so much. Ambassador.
Yes, sir.
What's your take?
No, I think two things appear to have happened, over the course of the last few decades. One, the whole philosophy that trade and investment is actually a matter of relationship has gone out of the window. It has become some kind of a parlayed contract, and therefore the sharpest and the meanest of attorneys and whatnot are the ones who go to negotiate a piece of paper. And if you are not on the ball, by the time you are aware, you have basically sold, your whatever it is that you thought you had. And then secondly, increasingly, you realize that the 18th and 17th century, philosophy of protecting my country's interest has come back to fore. And therefore, people are more interested in exacting from other countries what they think constitutes the defense of their national interest. And when it comes to that, those of us who don't have, the requisite savvy, those of us who don't have the guns to back it and whatnot, we are the ones who end up losing. And when you look at even now, the flow of population these days is not fluid anymore in terms of crossing national boundaries, because everybody seems to have defined what they consider to be their national interest. And this is at a time when everybody also says that the world has become a global village. Where exactly is the village? And how global is it? So when you put all these things together, you realize that the relationships that other people are seeking are not relationships meant to sort of institute a certain kind of commonality of interest, just so that we all accept that we are dealing with each other on fair and honest basis. So I, for one, I'm going to try to refrain from saying exactly what I would have said, but I would have believed, and I do believe now, that you cannot have somebody considered as a partner when the person leaves you with, masses of, acres of devastation in your country in defense of wanting to find some kind of a mineral or something in that country. And indeed, you don't even have anywhere else to go to complain. But I think all said and done, they say in the tree language that it is only when the tree allows itself that bees can produce, honey in it. So we have allowed ourselves for people to either take us for granted or take us for a ride, or sometimes behave as for us we don't even know what we are doing. That is what my worry is. And that one, it will apply to any country at all. Because you cannot be a partner, set up a business in my country, and then bring your own workers to come and work on it, and then take whatever it is that you want to take. In that case, where is my deed, in this partnership? It's not right. But then again, I believe that we are the ones who ought to stop it, because in defense of their interest, they aren't going to stop it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Barfuor, Ghana Ambassador to the United States of America, for that very, very interesting insight. Also, I thank you, Mr. Tijani Hamza from Oxfam International, based in Accra, Ghana. And also my very good friend, Alex. He's a senior director here at the Global Fund for Children in Washington, D.C. We'll take a short break on this show. And when we come back, we'll continue to discuss growth and development, fighting poverty and inequality in West Africa. I am AbdulRasheed Abubakar. Do not go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the New Frontier Africa. I am AbdulRasheed Abubakar. On the show today, we are discussing growth and development, fighting poverty and inequality in West Africa. Joining me in the studio to discuss this, I have His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Barfuor Adjei-Barwuah, Ghana Ambassador to the United States of America. And also I have Mr. Tijani Hamza from Oxfam International, based in Accra, Ghana. I have also joining me Mr. Alex Wofa. Mr. Alex, can you tell me more how the youth in which you supervise in your organization would be more effective and efficient in the development that we are talking about?
So obviously, thanks for the question. And obviously we know Africa is the youngest population in the world. So this is where youth advocacy becomes so critical, particularly for the continent, because we're talking about the future of the continent. These young people will be the ones at the helm of affairs as in the next few years, really making decisions that affect the country, such as being at the negotiation table, as His Excellency said earlier. And so it's crucial that we support their development and bring them along in current conversations. In my work and that of my colleagues, what we're seeing is that the youth are ready. They are clamoring to be given such opportunities. They are yearning to be given that trust. And that's part of what we support from the aspect of civic society. Because there, in many cases, what you find is when the youth find problems within their communities,
Yes.
they're triggered to then set up their own organizations in the form of NGOs to address the problems they find in their communities. And so what brings us great joy is to really partner with such organizations to help them along their growth trajectory, whatever that may be, to upskill and to then continue to be effective and move the needle in some of the problems that they face within their communities.
So Mr. Tijani, let me come to you. Based on what your organization focuses on the continent of Africa and in West Africa, now, and in Ghana in particular, which you are the country director, how do you, or what do you consider to be the solution, let me put it like that, to gross poverty in Africa or in West Africa?
Okay, thank you. It is important to say that over the years, there have been a lot of poverty reduction interventions in Ghana, in West Africa, in Africa, that has had significant impact on the livelihood of the people. So for example, Ghana in the last 20 years, poverty has been halved. In Gambia, poverty has reduced by 30%.
So what do you,
Mr.
Tijani, I didn't get that clearly. Give me again the fact and figure on the poverty data in Ghana.
Okay, so I was just making a point that over the last 20 years, poverty has been halved in Ghana.
Okay.
Over the last 20 years. And I was also telling you that in Gambia, you have seen that poverty has been reduced by a third. In Ethiopia, it has been reduced by 30%. But to answer your question, it is important to say that, Ghana as a country, everybody will say that Ghana is a middle-income country. Statistically, we are doing well. But the biggest challenge we have in Ghana is the issue around inequality. Ghana can easily be seen to be a country, two countries within one country, where the rural part of the country is different statistically from the urban side, where the southern is different from the northern side. To answer your question, I think there are a couple of things that governments have to do to support, to deal with what I call, to deal with the inequality gap. One is that governments in West Africa, including Ghana, should spend sufficiently on universal quality public services. That reduces the gap between the rich and the poor. So for example, how do we ensure that we spend 20% of our budget in education? We increase spending on public health and enact universal and protective policies. That's one. I also think that government should increase support and policies for agriculture. And the reason why this is important is that a disproportionately large number of women small-scale farmers engage in agriculture. And I think that high levels of government investment in small-scale farming could lift a lot of millions of people out of poverty. Another point that I think it is important is to strengthen the protection for labor rights and enact policies for more inclusive labor markets. We have angry workers in Ghana. The wages are low, labor rights are not respected. So if we have policies that respect rights of laborers, it's very, very important. But we should also ensure that multinational corporations pay their fair share of taxes by strengthening the anti-tax avoidance policies, transfer pricing legislation, and countermeasures against tax havens. I do know that, in Ghana 2 years ago, actually, 66% of our internal generated revenue was used to service debts. That means that we have few resources to invest in the social sector. But we also do know that tax per GDP, if you look at Ghana, tax per GDP is low as compared to other countries in the sub-region. So I do think that we can enhance our tax effort deal with issues around tax avoidance and then tax evasion. And over the last couple of years, I have seen an increasing move by the government to enhance the tax effort, but we still need to do a lot of work in that particular area. But specific also to tax, I think that the taxation we have in Ghana is what we say is not progressive, it's regressive. So more or less, I mean, by ratio, the poor pays more. We think that government can redistribute from the rich to the poor by what we call progressive taxation. Tax the rich more, let the rich pay wealth taxes. They should pay tax on capital gains. Corporate income tax should increase. You understand me? But also, I think that we should pay attention to the broader increasing tax compliance and deal with issues around corruption. So I do feel with a lot of investment in social spending, infrastructure development, are also enhancing the tax effort. It puts the country at a good footing to deal with the challenges of inequality that we have in the country.
Thank you so much for that insight. Ambassador, yes. What's your take on that?
For one thing, I believe that Ghana is probably one of the very few countries on this planet that have no reason to be poor. Because whatever it is that it takes to develop a good, prosperous community, Ghana has it. And I always sort of, I don't know whether it's a joke or something, I always make a point that Ghana sits on the Greenwich Meridian, and Ghana sits 3 degrees to the north of the equator. And from that point, whichever direction you move, Ghana is the first country that you will hit. In that case, one can make the argument that maybe when the good Lord was doing his business, creating the planet, he was standing on Ghanaian soil. So we do have the resources to do a lot. Ghana has a population that is supremely intelligent. Ghana has a population at the moment that is equally young. And for all that, we have problems of actually advancing our development.
Okay.
And the thing is, I, for one, at the moment, I seem to think that the younger set in Ghana has more or less come to believe that you don't have to, as it were, work hard enough to make a living. Now, that kind of attitude will have to change. And then we haven't also moved away from the colonial position that government is the giver of all things. Everybody really is part of the government. And therefore, government's job is to make sure that we organize enough, we supervise enough for the population to do the kind of things we need to do to survive as a country. Yes, when we got independence, we were small, less than 6 million. Now, we are far more than that. But then, at least if you look at the statistics, education and all that, we have moved up, even though the literacy rate at the moment, I think, could be high. But the important thing is that citizen attitude will have to change, because we have to graft in order to do what we do. In the same way that people's attitude to administration would also have to change. And that also would mean that administration itself would also have to change. You know, the whole bit about giving the impression that, you know, if you want a new shed, you can go and ask the government for a new shed. It's incorrect. Now, this is prevalent on the African continent, not Ghana alone. Fortunately, our education policy now would probably create a fundamental change in the sense that the government is committed that every Ghanaian child from day one to up to 17, 18 is entitled to education at basically no cost to themselves and their families. And therefore, at the end of that period, we ought to have the kind of population educated enough to support the country's development objectives. And that is where we need to be shifting. And then also, in talking about poverty and such, one has to take a look as to what is considered to be poverty. Because I think that we have to try and distinguish between the quality of life and the standard of life. Some Ghanaians are harassed because they cannot have enough money to purchase the latest vehicle on the street, even though they haven't been in employment for even 6 years or something like that. And now when I talk to some of the younger people I know, the graduates and such, I sometimes pose the question, why? Somebody comes out of the university, he's looking for a job. Now coming, with a job, the person most probably, especially if it's a government job, they want a house that is at least 3 bedrooms. They want a house that has a garage, probably 2-car garage. And for that, the man, one is not married, probably not even have a girlfriend, doesn't have a child, doesn't have a bicycle and all that, but he wants even a garage. So you see, when people raise their standards of living to that point, it compromises the quality of life for the greater proportion of the population. I bleed when 2 a.m. I'm on the street and then I see a woman, maybe 30-ish, 35-ish, with a child on the back, trying to sell chewing sticks on the street at that time of night. That should be an index of the fact that, yes, that woman is in difficulty and is prepared to do virtually anything to keep some kind of food on the table. So our definition of poverty would also have to change, because we have to develop, the kinds of activities, industries, and agriculture and whatnot that will make it possible for the economy to bubble and to make it possible for everybody to have a piece of the action. I don't think every Ghanaian is looking for owning a Rolls Royce or what have you. But at least the knowledge that if I got up this morning and I do this and I do that, the chances are that I'll be in a position to feed myself and my family. That is where the measurement of poverty will have to, lie. At the moment, there are too many people who don't even have the opportunity to eke out a living. And maybe it's partly attitude, it's partly, lapses in administration. And these are the kinds of things we need to look at.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for that very interesting insights. Thank you, Ambassador. Before we cut the show today, I would like to come back to Mr. Alex. Alex, give me more about, you've listened to what the ambassador talked about and Mr. Hamza. So tell me more about some of the activities of your organization in West Africa that could potentially help boost West Africa's economy.
Well, before I get into that and to clarify your question, I just wanted to touch on a few things that were shared, that I totally agree with the ambassador saying that it's not government's role entirely. And I think that's the spirit of the SDGs, where everyone has a part to play. And that's supremely important because that brings into the conversation a well-developed civic society and the role that such stakeholders play in advancing such outcomes at the country level, at the community level. And so that's something that we continue to push. Even when you talk about civic society, you're usually talking about national NGOs, but then they're community-based organizations, in some cases are not even registered. And that's something that's where, again, we go back to government creating the environment. And I would advocate that it is government's responsibility to create that enabling environment for all these different entities to play their part, including the private sector, which has a major part to play in all of this, straight from corporate social responsibility, but even to their own continuous mission, depending on what sector you're talking about. He also touched on just the concept of youth and or the misconception that you can get things pretty easily. And I also share that, and I think that's where we do have to bring them into the conversation, right, and engage them and give them that agency to essentially, I on a personal level, there were parts of my childhood that I was brought up with my grandparents. And so I picked up traditional values. And I think we're moving away from that as a society across the continent, where because of development, the little development that we have achieved because of globalization, we're losing out on that ability to bring our children up in the traditional values, the good traditional values, because they're good and they're bad. But it's really a complex issue and so many pieces of the puzzle. And so it's very, very, I would caution that we don't just have one definition of what it means to eradicate poverty, because there's so many different perspectives. And I'm coming to this conversation from the perspective of the civic society and how we can bring youth into the conversation to advance some of these. So I'm sorry if I moved the conversation away a bit from your question, but I wanted to react to some of the themes that came up. Sorry about that.
No problem, Alex. I will have to bring you back again on the show and engage more on your work at the Global Fund for Children.
Definitely, and also get some younger people on here as well.
Yes,
because
we'll
I may be the youngest on this, but I'm by no means any more part of the youth demography. So that's another thing that I would advocate that you consider, to bring some of the young voices onto the table.
Onto the table. Okay, so we'll work on that to bring more, young CEOs and young entrepreneurs out there, onto the show. Before you go, Mr. Tijani Hamza, tell me one more thing, and the audience, what you would like us to know about Oxfam International in Ghana. You muted your mic.
Sorry. Oxfam has been in Ghana over the last, can you hear me please? Over the last 24 years.
24 years, okay.
And over the years, we have worked in areas around accountable governance, where we feel that if we work towards public financial management, decentralization, issues around anti-corruption, strengthening civil society to have a voice and play a role on policy processes, but also value for money, is key for the country. We also work in what we call natural resource governance. I mean, we will all know that Ghana is a rich country, as Ambassador said. We have oil, we have gold over the years. But if you ask a typical Ghanaian, where or how does he or she feel the impact of the oil in our pockets or our livelihood is negligible. So work around natural resource governance so that mining, for example, doesn't have adverse economic and social impact, but also that women and men benefit from the mining. We also have a broader program around what we call inequality, with a focus on education and then maternal and child health, because we think that education and then maternal and child health, especially for men, women, girls, has a multiplier effect on the standards of living of people. So we have big investments, interventions in Ghana on education. We have piloted interventions on what we call the Model Junior Girls School, where based on a pilot we did in 2 districts, currently over 70 districts in Ghana, without Oxfam support, have heard about those interventions and they are implementing it in their areas. As you know, gender and women's empowerment is key to our work. So we also have big investments in what we call gender-based violence, where, as you know, there are challenges around women's empowerment. So gender-based violence programming provides us an opportunity to deal with some of the challenges that women and girls face in the country. We work at different levels, influencing policy, testing models at the local level, and when there is a humanitarian crisis, we will intervene. So, for example, we are currently spending over $600,000 to repurpose our grants to intervene on the COVID response in Ghana. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Tijani Ahmed from Accra, Ghana. Ambassador, what message do you have for Ghanaians in the diaspora to round up the show?
Well, I think I can only say that we as a country, we have an opportunity to redesign and actually up our game because we have whatever it takes. And I think if we have to make significant changes, then the changes obviously will have to start today. Why? Because today stands between yesterday, where we had dreams and other things, and then tomorrow, where our hopes and our expectations are. And therefore, if we want to make it to tomorrow and achieve whatever it is that we would want to achieve as a country, we can only start today. And I think there's a whole lot that we ought to be able to do with the guidance of good government, and we do have one, with a certain kind of guidance with regard to the business community, because we also have to develop private enterprise a little more for it to take a lot of what should happen. And then, of course, please ask all of us citizens to recognize the fact that whatever we do, this is the only country that we have. And because we are citizens, when we have to go back, the country has to take us in. And therefore, we ought to support the country to make sure that when we go in, we don't go and constitute a problem, but rather part of a solution. We have to do that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Barfuor. Thank you all for watching the New Frontier Africa show today. My name once again is AbdulRasheed Abubakar. Until we meet next time, I say bye for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.